Lesson 7 of Module 7 Infectious Disease. In this video, we're going to be looking at how we can prevent the spread of disease by looking at prevention, treatment, and control measures that we can employ. And we're going to look at the including but not limited points here, and then we're going to look at some more further in class. So there are local, regional, and global factors that we can use to limit the spread of disease. So our local factors include our sanitation, avoiding any overcrowding, but if there is overcrowding, that can increase the spread of disease. If we have poor communication, networks and roads, and also our cultural and spiritual beliefs that we see locally can influence any attitudes to medical advice. Some of our regional factors include things to do with geographical our factors, so where we are in the world. In coastal populations, we see seafood consumption, which you can see different pathogens being introduced, and also seasonal variation can either increase or decrease the availability of vectors. And then some of our global factors, due to increased travel and work and migration, we're seeing pathogens being spread around the globe at a faster and a larger rate than we've seen before. For refugee populations, we see food insecurity, overcrowding, and lack of healthcare access. And then some of the communication between scientists is now globally, which is helpful in treating and understanding infectious diseases. There are pathogen factors, so different amounts of virulence, incubation periods differ, and therefore some are, and also some are environmentally resistant. Host factors, so if a host is compromised, so the young, the elderly, but also people who may be suffering from another disease, we can see malnutrition and the use of pharmaceuticals all affect whether a host will be susceptible to a pathogen. Our environmental and geographic factors, so reservoirs can build up, especially during natural disasters, and environmental conditions can preserve the environment of the pathogen. And then other societal factors include anti-vaccination campaigns, which reduces the amount of herd immunity, and also isolated societies are at greater risk of disease outbreaks. When we talk about hygiene, we talk about personal and community hygiene. So personal hygiene is about each person keeping their body clean to reduce the risk of pathogens. So we have our oral hygiene, the hygiene we use when we go to the bathroom, whether we wash our hands, how we cough and sneeze, and whether we use a handkerchief or just sneeze into the open air and then therefore spread the pathogen around. And our community hygiene helps us to prevent the buildup of any pathogenic organisms in the community. This is maintained by the infrastructure we see. Sewage and garbage disposal is really important in keeping the community very hygienic, but there is a role that the city plays with their planning to reduce overcrowding. Clean food and water. So in Australia, we have the Food Standards Authority, which has strict guidelines that must be followed for food handlers in regards to storing, preparing, and serving food. And then we have a high water quality, which in Sydney we have due to Sydney Water, and this is due to their daily water testing to meet the strict government standards that we've talked about previously, but also to also ensure that there are no pathogens. Quarantine has a role in minimising the risk of exotic pests and diseases entering Australia, and this is in order to protect our native flora and fauna, our high-functioning agricultural industries, our environment, and therefore our overall health. Animal quarantine, plant quarantine, and human quarantine are the three different groups that may have to experience quarantine on their entry to Australia to ensure that they are not available to transmit any pathogens, which will then affect our population. Vaccination, so this can be the introduction of a weakened or killed form of a microbe, its toxins, or one of its surface proteins, and it therefore produces an immune response. It primes the immune system to deal with a pathogen it may never have been in contact with, and therefore ensuring that a person never experiences the symptoms of that disease. We can have active acquired immunity, and this is where the immune response and memory cells are produced, or we can have passive acquired immunity where we actually introduce the antibodies into the person. Vaccinations are harmless to the body and will not cause the disease they are specific for. Each vaccine is specific for one type of antigen, and then a series of vaccines or booster shots should be given over a number of years to help lymphocytes more rapidly recognize the antigen. Public health programs. So this and these are government regulations that help to ensure that standardized procedures are in place, and it includes things for handling our food, sterilizing equipments that we use in hospitals, surgeries, or clinics, disposing correctly of our garbage, and effectively treating our drinking water. So laws are in place to ensure that certain diseases are reported once they're detected. So we're seeing lots of measles in the news. Then that's because these cases, each of them has to be reported when they are identified in a person. We see regular screening for certain diseases, so breast cancer, pap tests, and prostate cancer. And then our childhood immunization program, which we go through from when we're born all the way to when we're in high school, is a public health program that aims to prevent the spread of diseases. There are public education programs which help to increase public awareness of some lifestyle related risk factors. So, some examples here are the QUIT programs for smoking, the Slip, Slop, Slap campaign to prevent skin cancer. There's a Life Be In It, which is to help prevent obesity and promote an active lifestyle. And then we also have on the right here, we have the RICE approach to control infectious diseases. So here we have the resolution of governments and health organizations, information in the form of epidemiological studies, a coordination of efforts on a local, regional, and global scale, and the education of human populations. And this is the approach that we need to take to ensure that all infectious diseases are controlled. So we can watch these videos about lung cancer and our Slip, Slop, Slap ad, and these are hyperlinked in our slides. And then we're looking at pesticides as well. So this is another way that we can kill the pests of plants and animals, any pathogens and vectors that may transmit pathogens from one organism to another. A good example is our DDT, which we use to kill lice and mosquitoes, which are the cause of, or the vector responsible for typhus and malaria, respectively. But the problem with using these is that we can see a development of resistance, and it may also have damaging effects on the environment if we use these to prevent the spread of the disease. And genetic engineering is another way which we can prevent the spread. And this involves altering the genetic composition of an organism to make them possibly resistant to a disease. So an example here is Bt concert, where we produced a natural insecticide from the bacterium that were introduced into cotton that kills any insects, pests that may feed on the cotton plant. So using genetic engineering aims to prevent the occurrence of disease in organisms and therefore control the spread of this disease through populations. However, there are ethical issues, and we see a reduction in biodiversity by using genetic engineering processes. Some of the implications for the future if we're using genetic engineering, so there have been some success stories. Actually, this is not just for genetic engineering. So implications for the future, we're seeing some success stories. So we're seeing the eradication of smallpox and the decline of some common human diseases. However, some areas have been disasters. So we've seen the spread of the cinnamon fungus in Australian ecosystems. Genetic engineering is a promising technique which aims to increase the resistance of host to pathogens, and then we're seeing some of our controls work for a time, but then their effectiveness declines. So we need to continually work to see how we can continually keep ourselves educated, but also scientifically prepared for any changes that we might see in the pathogen. That concludes lesson 7. Make sure you tune in for lesson 8.